What if the employees you need live in Portugal or India or the Netherlands? Hiring internationally brings international challenges. Remote takes care of payroll, benefits, taxes, and compliance for your whole team all over the world, so you can focus on growing your business.
Well, that's kind of a cool little intro for the lead on our panel. He is the CEO of Remote.com, Joop van der Voort. Wow, you get like your own little, your own little promo ahead of time. Welcome, Joop. We're really excited to have you moderate this panel.
Thanks, Danny.
Building your all-remote company, pitfalls and advantages of a fully remote workforce. Also joining us, the president at UYD Management, Tayo Roxon. Tayo. Good morning, good afternoon. Where are you, Tayo? Yeah, you weren't sure when to come on stage.
Yeah, I wasn't sure when to come on. I just noticed everybody else had their pictures.
Where are you joining us from today?
The Big Apple. So I'm
wow.
New York City. New York City.
Wow, awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Tayo. Leia, as in Princess Leia, Leia Nobler, the Director of Talent Acquisition at Help Scout. That is just a wonderful name. Leia, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Where are you? ¿Dónde estás?
Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay, so we've got like a little Red Sox Yankees thing kind of going here. Interesting. Darcy Bowles, Director of Culture and Innovation at TaxJar. Hey, Darcy.
Hey, Danny.
Pleasure to have you with us. Joop, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to this, and we'll see you at the end of the session. Remember, everyone, after the session, we will take a 1-hour break, check out the various booths, communicate and network, and certainly check out the Remote.com booth as well. Joop will be waiting there handing out virtual flyers. Now, you might be on lunch. You're in the Netherlands. You'll be having dinner. But either way, take it away, guys, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.
All right. Thanks so much, Danny. All right. So I'm going to start right into it. And I think I don't have to tell anyone what has been happening in the past few months, something that has affected all of us. And for the greater remote working community, this presents a shift, or does it? I'm not sure. So to start off, and I'm going to start with Tayo, what have you been seeing over the last few months, given the whole pandemic that we're in?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think it's been interesting in shifts. So in the United States, when it happened, started off, late February, early March, and there was just this panic because a lot of companies that had never really worked remotely were now in a position where they were doing that. And I found myself having to explain to companies that this isn't typical remote work. This is a very different type of remote work. But one thing that was a little worrying for me was that diversity, equity, and inclusion wasn't necessarily given the priority because obviously people were trying to figure out how to save money and cut costs, and that seemed to be one of the earlier programs. But in the last 2 to 3 weeks, I don't know if you've seen what's happening. We're in the midst of a civil rights movement. It seems to be this shift where everybody remembers, anti-Blackness and anti-racism is a thing, and so now there's that idea of going back to incorporating that. So it's in those two phases. The first transition was just trying to help people navigate the natural remote environment, and then it became, we need to make sure we factor in inclusion. So that's been what I've noticed on this side of the world.
Leia, has the same been for you? Have you seen similar things? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I want to echo what Tayo said. I was saying a lot. There's a difference between being a remote company and working from home during a pandemic. Very different things.
Yeah.
And I think, there was the initial transition period of that first month, mid-March into April, wherever all companies were like, okay, we need to figure this out yesterday. Let's go. And I think now, that it's been a couple months, companies are starting to find their stride, but you can't flip a switch and just, we're a remote company now, right? It takes time, it takes intention, it takes thoughtfulness. And there's been, no shortage of panels and webinars like this with, remote pros giving tips. So I think just pointing out there's a difference between working from home during a pandemic and being an actual intentional remote company.
That does make a lot of sense, and I think we've been all saying exactly that for the past few months. That said, now that we're all forced to work from home or work remotely in some capacity, are there any unique opportunities that we should capture? And I think Tayo already referenced one. Asking you, Darcy, this time to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you go remote, my view is that the world is absolutely your oyster. I mean, when you're remote, there are so many things that our brains, just because we were in offices for so long, or just socially, that was just how we worked, was in person. You start to see the benefits of working remotely, from environmental, from what Ty talked about, but diversity and inclusion. You're not limited to a talent pool in where your office is. And that is such a blessing. And it's just incredible. And so I think from an opportunity standpoint, companies who are kind of thrown into this remote workforce that didn't necessarily have their own established ethos of working remote, or their values were remote, they're starting to notice now that, as Leah said, people got their stride. Oh my gosh, look at where we can actually focus our energy and time, instead of spending so much time with all of the BS that, fortunately for a lot of companies, especially tech companies, can now just get rid of and start focusing on the things that matter. And so obviously there's a lot of complications when you go to remote in terms of just understanding the legalities, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more, but the opportunities that lie in remote are vast and, in my opinion, never ending. And I think it's such an opportunity.
Thanks, Darcy. And we're luckily joined by Sarah as well. Sarah, the founder and CEO of FlexJob. Sarah, I'm going to go straight to you with a question, and actually following up, like what do you see as opportunities for organizations that now are forced to start working remotely? Are there unique opportunities, and how should they capture those?
Yeah, hi, sorry, I was a little late. I think it's been really interesting. And, we've long been saying that remote work offers the opportunity to utilize both the best of technology and the best of human powered energy and intelligence. And I think the companies that have been forced into trying this under duress have, interestingly, now that, as you all have described, have settled and are starting to realize some of the tangential benefits that they didn't initially realize. I think that psychology going into it thinking, I'm just going to try to be a little bit productive, or maybe as productive as I was before, has started to shift to the fact that, oh, wow, I could actually be more productive in some ways. I was actually in a conversation on a panel with representatives from Microsoft and Ford a couple weeks ago. And Microsoft is fairly tech forward, so I won't speak to that as much. It wasn't so much of a transition for them. But for Ford, it was very new. And one of the other panelists said something that really has stuck with me because it was so unexpected. He works in the design area with designing trucks and such. And he was saying that what they've realized is there's almost a creative amplification happening from within organizations when you really pay attention to how you're working. It's an opportunity to rethink how we work, which those of us who have been involved in remote work for a long time know, but it was exciting for me to hear an organization or somebody from an organization like Ford to see that and to start to see the long-term benefits of embracing this far beyond the pandemic.
That's great. That's great to hear, Sarah. I want to go back to what Tayo mentioned earlier on, in specifically regarding diversity and inclusion. And you mentioned that, the past 2-3 weeks, suddenly this got a big spotlight, and, deservedly so. Should have, of course, already been very different for a very long time. And I think we're all in agreement about that. Do you think that there is a unique opportunity now for organizations to do better in that sense, Tayo?
Absolutely. And Darcy hit one of the points. And one of the points is, one of the reasons that people would have said, I don't want to go remote is, I can't see you, I can't trust you, but also, they didn't know how to work with people who were immunocompromised, people from different backgrounds and people in different countries. And now that that's something that is inevitable, people are realizing that maybe their mindset from that has to be less rigid. But in terms of opportunity, I think when you're hiring, you can really, this is an opportunity for you to define what your company culture is going to be, right? So when you're hiring, the type of questions you're asking, the type of things you're looking for should be culture adds, right? How can I get someone who can benefit and grow the company in this way, who has a certain mindset? Part of what has happened to boost and perpetuate systemic racism is that there's been silence about things that matter, and there have been instances where cultures have been made to just toxic cultures have been made to slide by because of consequence. And now that there is a level of accountability that is being thrown and thrust into the spotlight, I feel like CEOs and leaders can actively call things up, but also make it a sustainable thing. And I also think that companies that are working with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants should understand that just because you're not physically there doesn't mean you can't lead trainings, you can't facilitate trainings, you can't have your ERGs, your employee resource groups, or your action councils. You can still do these things, but you need to make sure that it is a part of your everyday week. And I guess the last thing that I would say would be, this is a unique time for collaboration. A lot of times in the past, the reason why people from the top and people at the entry level have felt the disconnect is because they felt like voicing out their opinions would not be, would really not be met with that response. And so I think it's a unique time for collaboration on things like retention and promotion criteria, where you actually decide, hey, we heard you, we have these conversations, these are the things you need to hit to be promoted, and these are the things we're doing to make sure that we're tapping into different talent pools. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity, but leaders have to say that they're going to do that and be willing to be authentic about it, and even public about it too. So
that's great. And it to me, it sounds like a lot of the things you're saying are things that organizations should do, not directly related even to remote work. It's almost like, yeah, we're working remotely, but these are the similar kind of policies that we would have if we are in office or when we return to an office.
Yeah, but the funny thing with that is that many consultants, all of us here have worked at the capacities, we would say these things, but it's been put in the nice to have category as opposed to the need to have. And so now that that's the beauty of the last 3 weeks, it's that all of a sudden there's a voice. 2020 is such a unique situation where most people are now home and people are now listening and people are seeing things. So if you don't do what you should have been doing before, here are the consequences. So yeah, people should be doing what they should be doing all along.
So following up on this and going a little bit high level, Leah, how do you create a company culture, and how do you make sure that it's good when everybody is working from home?
Yeah, I love this question. And I love what everyone's saying so far. Talking about remote work just gets me so jazzed. I love talking about remote culture because I think so many folks think to have a company culture, you need a physical space. There has to be an office with cool furniture and the foosball table and, kegerators and beanbag chairs and open office concepts. And I think now, even more than ever, people all agree that stuff is not necessary. Culture doesn't come from space. Culture comes from, I think, what Taya was getting at too. It comes from your values, especially for founders. Decide, week one, what does your company stand for? What are your company values? And then how are you infusing them throughout everything, through the product, through how you hire, through your content. And then, you're hiring folks who are aligned with that, who are excited by that. And that's how you start to build and grow culture. And then I think the next piece to me is, what makes working at your company special? What's different about working here than anywhere else? What happens at your company that's unique? What rituals and rhythms do you do that you can celebrate and talk about that attract people to want to work at your company? So I have to just always refer to what, we really do at Help Scout that I love. And every Monday I make a really short Monday video. And so it's asynchronous. So it's remote friendly. Everyone can sign on and watch it whenever they want. And it just kind of announces, birthdays, announcements, anniversaries, updates, celebrations. And, over time I've really evolved this to feel kind of like a mini TV show. But all it takes is an iPhone. You don't need, a fancy video studio, even though, I've evolved to that, which I'm excited about. But I didn't know any of this on day one. I didn't know it. The first Monday video I did was vertical, and I'm so embarrassed about it now. But it's just things like this that anyone can do. And now everyone, I'm very lucky, everyone at Help Scout, they look forward to Mondays. And they're like, I sometimes get pinged on Slack, where's the Monday video? I'm like, all right, everyone relax. But that's a unique thing to Help Scout. And so I think I just encourage everyone to figure out what's special to their company and then, make it happen and think about how you do it in a remote way.
That's great, Leah. Thanks so much. There's a lot of people watching and they can ask questions. If you are watching and you have any questions, please add them, because I will start to go through some of them. And I'll start with the first one for you, Darcy, which is Chris asks, do you feel that starting a company with all remote founders, especially now, will just take longer because everything is remote?
No, I think it takes less time. I think kind of what Tayo and Leah both touched on is that remote cultures are actually, if you strip everything down, they're values-driven cultures. And Leah touched on something really important, that once you decide those values, like having 3 remote founders starting a company now, going all remote, is probably, in my opinion, one of the best positions you could be in going remote, because it's so much easier to build a fully remote culture than I think it is to transition, because our brains are so used to working one way. And then when you actually build a system that is all based on the same way and for scalability, you can build everything within that environment being remote and choosing where you work. And so choosing those values and choosing, it sounds like remote to them and to Chris perhaps is one of your values. Awesome. Stick to that. Don't stray from it. And really putting both feet in and making that decision up front of, how you're going to operate as a company, because culture, as Leah talked about, is not about the food tables. It's not about everything. Culture is how you think, feel, say, and do as a company, and how that breathes. It's a living, breathing entity, and how founders basically choose at the beginning how they want that to be, and then hire people to help grow and scale that culture. So, man, Chris, that sounds like an awesome opportunity. And I think you could actually scale it much faster than, imagine having to sign a lease right now on a building for an office, right? That just goes out the window. Log into Zoom, figure it out. Like, that's the beauty of all this. It's scrappy. If you're into that, like, I love building things from nothing, and a lot of people do, especially in startups. So sounds like an awesome opportunity to me.
Yeah, it's funny. So my company, which we call Remote, me and my co-founder, we only saw each other during the time that we founded the company in real life, maybe at most once a month, and especially not the last several months. We're doing pretty well. And so an automatic follow-up to this question, which always comes, and in this case, it's for you, Sarah. So now you're working remote. How do you capture that serendipity that can happen in an office between, for instance, a designer and an engineer that have lunch together and come up with this great idea? How do you capture that? Greg asks.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly one of the concerns that comes up a lot. The water cooler serendipity. So, I think to the culture areas, you build a culture of getting to know each other as well. And I don't even mean personally, but you create opportunities for people to interact in ways that are not just focused on a certain project. We do things like trivia nights and other fun culture elements that do develop that rapport, that relationship. We have people in our organization that have coffee hours, and we use a platform where you can kind of see the architect schema of a building. So you can see, oh, somebody's in the hanging out in the garden, or hanging out in the kind of the chairs over there. I can go in and just say hi. So you have these opportunities where people, if you are wanting to kind of get up for a walk or just have some free time, is a possibility. Having been a remote company for 13 plus years now, it's something that serendipity absolutely happens on a regular basis. I don't think being at the water cooler in an elevator or walking down the hall happens to be the magic. And I also encourage companies, when they think of that question, to also think of the shadow side. Because quite honestly, culture in an office, while it can lead to good things, it also can be toxic. There are a lot of, I've certainly worked in toxic work environments, and I think that for different people and different work styles, being in an office can actually be quite challenging and restrictive. For introverts, for example, for other people who, I just think it's where, if you're in that environment where you can collaborate with people and be open with them and exchange ideas in a community, in a way that's proactive and open and not going to be criticized, I think it comes a lot down to that culture, much more than it does necessarily where you are, and being, physically in person. So I think that there's a lot to be said about the inclusiveness of that magic too. there's a lot of elements of a company that are built around an office building and or in that in-person experience, but that inherently can leave people out of the experiences that if they don't fit the guidelines for it. So for example, some of the culture things like you have so you have a happy hour on Fridays after work. Well, if you're a working parent or somebody who's a long commute, or you ride share with somebody who has to leave, you're left out of those opportunities to create those moments with people. And in a remote organization, you have to really conscientiously think about how to translate that. And therefore it becomes more inclusive for everyone working remotely. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but you pay attention to how to create those.
Tayo, do you think that inclusivity follows automatically from remote work? Sarah does say you have to be explicit about what you do, but like, does inclusivity follow when thinking about communication, or what else can organizations do?
So the thing about this is there has to be a level of intentionality. In much with life, I think this is a philosophy we all need to apply, but remote companies can become conditioned if you're not intentional. So I think in addition to making your values clear, you need to prioritize team building, like Sarah was saying. But I also encourage a couple more things. It's something I call empathy hours, right? Empathy hours. And basically it's an opportunity for everyone on your team to share whatever's on their mind. And, this is basically people are talking about things that are affecting them or they're excited about outside of work every week. And I try to get teams to do this at least once a week, because the whole goal here is to humanize people. And people forget that companies are made up of people. So the more you know anyone and what drives them, it's very important to do that. So empathy hours, prioritizing team building. And then another thing is to identify and empower your SMEs or your subject matter experts. That's New York City in the background, your subject matter experts. And what I mean is anyone in the company in a remote area could have an idea. We're talking about water cooler moment. Say, hey, I have an idea for us to factor in all the continents in our group. Can I create a path here? Here's a training for that. And when you empower and you allow people to do that, whether it's through the collaboration tools, that's going to, just stoke this interest where people would be like, hey, I saw what you did. Here's my addition. Here's my addition. And it's just that, right? It replicates an elevator moment, but it also allows people to sit with things and understand that, hey, I heard that in your empathy hour and I saw that you did this, and it makes me understand why this is important to you, and then you grow. So I think it's there.
Empty hours. That's a great concept. I think that's one that we're going to steal at least at remote.
Steal away. Mental health is something that often doesn't get talked about here. So empathy hour is a great moment to humanize and people to feel the full spectrum of their humanity. So take it.
I want to also talk a little bit about some of the challenges that come with remote work. And in this case, there was a really good related question, which is from Hafstein, who says, how do you deal with the boundary management and the phenomenon of the erosion of normal working hours? So where, the difference between work and daily life slowly disappears, and like the threshold to start working becomes lower and lower, and one starts seeping into the other. Leah, how do you personally deal with this, and how do you deal with the people in your organization?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and people wonder about that a lot. And I think it connects for me, a piece of that. Remote companies need to be really clear about communication and actually create communication guidelines and norms so that everyone understands, like, okay, what are this team's working hours, or what are your working hours? And then you use tools to, make that easily known. So we, of course, use, Google Calendar, and we ask everyone at the company to set their working hours and look at people's calendars. So you, first of all, know if you're making a meeting with someone, when to not do it. And, we also use Slack and encourage everyone to put, snooze notifications from whatever hours you're not working. And because a lot of it also is on you. You have to be in charge of what your working hours are and how you manage your time and protect that. And so, I think it also stems into being asynchronous, and remote work tends to, I think, really favor async work. And you don't have to respond to everything right away if that's your company's norm, as it should be. And so, I think there's a lot of things you can do to be mindful about, not working around the clock just because you're home now, but, you have to be in charge of it. And my dog is saying hello.
One of my favorite things from working with people and seeing is seeing their house and their home in the background, be it their children, being the sounds of New York seeping in, be it the pets that come by. In my background, you see a Lego Millennium Falcon, which I proudly display there. Darcy, is there anything that I love to hear about these is there anything you personally do to manage the difference between work and daily life, and how do you create that separation?
I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. And I think most remote employees and friends that I talk to who work full-time remotely, it is a challenge. It's a challenge to get teammates to take time off as well, because if you have an engaged workforce and you're working from home, working remotely, the combination is you just kind of tend to keep working. I mean, I work in a 350 square foot apartment at the beach, and my office is in my kitchen, and there's no separation. And so I have to be really, really cognizant of taking time off. And I think it's really about your leadership team leading by example, as well as kind of what Leah mentioned is communication guidelines. You know, here is the minimum amount of time the company wants. We have 5 weeks that we ask for minimum for people to take off per year, and modeling that and actually reminding people. So quarterly, reminding your teammates, have you set some carrots to dangle over the next quarter? Do you have time set up for the next quarter? Because sometimes it's even that moment of just taking an hour or two to go set time off on your own calendar, and whether you know what you're going to do in 3 months, because Lord knows with COVID right now where we can go, but even just setting that time off to log off and let your team know that you're not going to be available, and just marking your calendar in advance is so essential. And it's so essential for our mental health, as Tayo mentioned, and which doesn't get talked about enough, and so essential to also not getting into burnout mode. I mean, going into burnout is the worst thing you can do for yourself and the company that you work for. Because the second you go into burnout, you're not engaged and you're not doing good work anymore. And then what's the point? So it's definitely a ongoing challenge, but setting those boundaries and being really honest with yourself of, if you're a leader at a company, am I doing what I want my teammates to do? Am I setting the right example? Because especially in remote work, there's a large sense of imposter syndrome. People there still is a social construct where a lot of us fall into, if we're lucky to be remote, I must work harder to stay remote. And you know, that's not actually the case for most remote companies. It's just how we operate. And so you have to kind of get yourself out of that mindset and really over permit yourself, and as a leader, set that example.
That's great, Darcy. There's a few simple tricks that I follow. One of them is always take the week off of my birthday. So you make it special, and then if you have a partner, you take the week off of their birthday as well, and that gives you at least like 2 moments in the year where you're like, okay, I have to take time off.
You need to have anchors.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe the holidays, or like the anti-holidays, you know, when everybody is working in the middle of the year and no one else is. Switching gears a little bit, this is a highly upvoted question from Bernard. For you, Sarah, opportunities are limited and not very open to talents in developing countries, especially Africa. Should we expect a change in that bias in the new normal?
It's a great question. And I think that with unemployment so high in a variety of areas, it's a pressing one. I think that the jump from tech and knowledge industry jobs into developing nations and to match the skills in those areas as well is something that we have to focus on and continue to develop. But I do think that a lot of organizations are identifying ways that they can come up with, especially right now, organizations are going to have to look forward and realize they need a remote element to their workforce, even if they're only doing it in part, but they're going to have this hybridized situation in order to be safer from future issues like this that might arise, and hopefully don't have one of this scale, of course. But in terms of planning, I think companies are going to identify that remote workers and the opportunity to hire in different areas globally can really strengthen your organization as a whole. So, you know, we are seeing companies, especially in areas of like tech support and certain programming areas and online education, medical and health in some areas, although those have more legal compliance issues that get involved. But there are companies that are looking at scaling roles that can be better to I guess to be scalable across different countries. And so I think that it's something exciting. Companies are identifying that remote work has to work. I mean, this has been a global work from home experiment of a massive scale, and it's been inspiring to see how well it's worked overall. I was looking at a survey the other day that 64% of people who have had to work from home want to work from home post-pandemic. And so this is something that both from the worker and job seeker side and employee side, but also from an employer side, particularly from a realization that it affects their productivity in situations like this and hurts their bottom line, that they're going to have to be responsible moving forward to integrate it more. So the growth and opportunities is definitely anticipated to continue in an exciting way.
Yeah, I think that's it's something that we see at remote as well. So we help with the compliance bit, right? So, and one thing that stood out to me is that like the demand for making it easier to hire people and to employ people, especially in Africa, is enormous. And it's one of our areas of expansion, particularly for this. And another thing I found was that the people that want this, it's all sorts of professions, right? Like it's not just people that want to do a particular job. It's like literally anything you could do remotely. I've seen demand for, please make it possible for us to work for organizations outside of the country in which we are in. Tayo, I wanted to ask you a question that came from the audience from Harsha, which is a very interesting one. Harsha says a lot of the variance in employee experience, 70%, happens due to managers. How can you help your team managers to make employees feel valued and appreciated consistently across the organization when working remotely?
Well, when you are communicating value in a company, I think it's done in multiple ways, whether it's remembering birthdays, remembering cultural holidays, also the benefits. I think one of the things that COVID revealed, unfortunately, is that benefits they're not equal with the way they've been factored in. We've seen here it affects more Black and brown folks, but then you investigate deeper and you're like, how? The access to healthcare is very different. That this group might need more than that group. And when you use this cookie cutter approach where you assume everybody is going to benefit from the same thing, someone likes a gym membership as opposed to that, then you get into this place where you are using a lens for a different culture to approach that. And so I would have conversations with people as I'm hiring them, or even now, in your one-on-ones, and say, hey, what are the things that are important to you? This is one of the reasons why the empathy hour is very important, is that people have to remember that we either go to school or we work for most of our lives. And so if we're going to be in one of these institutions for the most part of our life, it's very frustrating to have to decide and take off parts of ourselves. And this happens to many people of color. So if you want to make sure that they feel valued, seen, and understood for who they really are, it involves a conversation, and that type of conversation happening over and over again. So looking at what things are important to them in terms of valuing, whether it's their birthdays or their benefits, but also seeing how they see themselves in the long-term benefits. Some people are staying in the company because they need the money, and some people are staying in the company because they believe in your values. There's a distinction.
Leah, you deal with a lot of people that are just onboarding, or you're trying to hire. Is there something in particular you do earlier in the process than what Tayo was talking about to make sure that people feel like they're in a welcome environment, or that this is an environment where they will feel valued?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a really robust, long onboarding period that includes, a presentation from everyone on our executive team who gives that new person, a little intro into like what that team does and what their goals are. We also have an onboarding presentation all about inclusion at Help Scout, and we go over, what does inclusion mean to us? How are we, enacting it across the company? Where can you go for support? So just, from day one, new folks, kind of are put on notice about all the things they need to know to be successful at Help Scout, and also to feel welcomed and included, and what resources are available to them. And then, we're really big on managers coming up with 30, 60, 90-day plans so that new people also know what's expected of them. I think that's a great way for anyone to feel welcome in a new company, is to say, oh, my manager's really like scoped out what I should be doing and what those milestones are. And great, I feel ready to go. And I just think you have to be, I think onboarding is important whether you're co-located or not, by all means, but I think it's even more important when you're remote, because you don't show up to an office the first day. You're not like, hey, everyone, come sit with me at lunch. You're just like turning on your computer and probably dropping into Slack. So we're very intentional also about setting all new hires up with like a work best friend, as we call it. And that person's responsible to checking in on them and saying hello and, being their kind of new person buddy. So we're like, again, just very intentional about the first week to the second week to the 60th day, even just making sure they're structured and they know what's expected of them and that people are checking in on them so they feel cared for. It's really important.
Work best friend. That's a good name for that.
Who doesn't want a work best friend?
Yeah, I'm taking a lot of notes today. This is great. I'm going to come back and half the company will be running smoothly. Darcy, is there anything you do with people that are coming into the organization that you make sure that they're happy and that they feel like they are well included into the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really look, and I think our team looks at hiring as a mutual relationship. For so long, candidates were just, I need a job. And we have really gone from an employee-driven or employer-driven market to a candidate-driven market. And so it's really important that we're finding the right, I know fit's kind of a weird word, but finding the right fit. Like, we want the person working at TaxJar to want to work here, and we want them to work here too, right? It's a relationship, and it's a give and take. We want to be in a symbiotic relationship. And so we, a lot of things we do up front. So we showcase our full benefits and everything that we offer through our blog and on our website. So if somebody is interested at the beginning, they can kind of, dig in on the light end. And then through the interview process, we go deeper. And then we actually have a 30 to 90 day mutual assessment period before anyone is hired full time. So somebody is basically made a mutual assessment offer. They come in on contract with us and really kind of start to explore the virtual office and TaxJar. Is this the place that they really want to work for them? And do we really want them to be here? We would never bring anybody in if we weren't 99% sure and they weren't 99% sure they want to work here. But being remote, letting people go is expensive. It's no fun for everybody. It is demoralizing for your team. It sucks. It's a terrible experience for everybody. And so the more we can do up front to make sure that long-term relationship, the right fit for the role, the right fit for the culture, the right fit for really moving the needle at the company and us really investing in the employee, because we financially invest in them too. And it's kind of like dating in a weird sense. And that kind of extra protection we put in both for the candidate and for us, we did it in 2017. We have no intention of going back to anything else.
That's great. It's a really nice principle. We have about 2 minutes left. So Sarah, I think this will be the last question for you, which is a very interesting one. How can I pitch to an employer to make a position remote?
Start with the basics. First of all, look at what your current role, what parts of it offer remote work or lend themselves to it. So where do you work independently by phone, computer, or laptop device, that type of thing? And pay attention to percentage that is. If it's 100%, then by all means, start to organize your thoughts. And ideally, you want to go in and talk to your manager when you're on the up and up, when you're doing well, usually not when you're not doing well. And also do your due diligence and look around if there's anybody else in your organization who has remote work or other types of flexibility, and maybe take them out to coffee or ask them for a coffee chat and find out how they got it and how it's been going, and if there are any concerns, pros, cons that they consider going into the meeting. And then, ask your manager, talk them through why they think you think you'll be more beneficial and more productive in your job. There are so many elements of engagement and productivity that remote work lend themselves to. And so I think you really want to focus on that and how it'll benefit the company, as well as help you maintain your your engagement and contributing it as maximally as you can. So go baby steps, though. I generally suggest asking for a trial first or suggesting it as opposed to forcing it.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I think that's a beautiful way to end this. And thanks everybody for being on this panel.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Job, and thanks to everyone for being involved. You know, one of the goals for us here at Running Remote is to really utilize our events to create a playbook, right? For anyone, anytime to start, build, scale a remote company. And I got to tell you guys, like that was a chapter right there in terms of everyone coming from very different perspectives with very different successful, thriving companies and really phenomenal information. And Job, you did an amazing job as a moderator. You can apply for a co-MC role if you want. We would consider it perhaps, coming up. Thank you guys so much for joining us here. Thanks. Okay, we'll take a break. It's lunchtime here on the West Coast. In Europe, it's dinner time. If you live in Spain like I do, but you're on the East Coast, Tayo, it's time for a siesta, I think. So feel free to take a little nap break. We will see you guys. Our next talk is at 1 p.m. Pacific. Go in and see Job at the remote booth. Check in on our partners and make sure to network with each other and be well. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. We will see you.